makes a hummingbird a hummingbird? And what came to mind first was, of course, its DNA. And while that's 100% true, hummingbirds are more than just a genetic code. It's wings moving so fast that they become a blur. It's the ability to hover in midair, fly backwards, move with impossible precision. It's a tiny body powered by an enormous amount of energy. Its color, its motion, its resilience, and its purpose packed into one of nature's smallest wonders. But there's one thing for sure and mutually agreed upon, that hummingbirds are amazing and they're truly loved. Their beauty and their size capture our imagination. They inspire us, they link us with each other, they unite us with nature. They connect us culturally, spiritually, and geographically. Found only in the Americas, there's an estimated 363 different species of hummingbirds. Colombia gets bragging rights with 165 species in that country. Hummingbirds occupy a variety of niches and habitats from sea level to elevations of 14,000 feet. From concrete cities to open grassland and rocky outcroppings. Location is dependent on a variety of factors, from a certain flower, a plant, or an insect, a certain climate or elevation, a protected nesting location, or their migration routes, or human impact, both good and bad. All play a significant role. However, the more specific your need is, the greater chance there is for decline in your species when pressure and rapid change is put upon that. Here in North America, we have 16 known species of breeding hummingbirds. 16. 15 of them are west of the Mississippi. However, only one breeds east of the Mississippi that we currently know of, and is the main subject of my research and the species that I'm going to talk mostly about today. So meet the ruby-throated hummingbird. They are the very bird that are found in your garden, outside, here, anywhere here, in Tennessee, Kentucky, Mississippi, Alabama, etc. They can be found from southern Canada to the Gulf Coast, from the East Coast into eastern Oklahoma, southern Kansas, a bit of Nebraska, some of North and South Dakota, as well as the eastern coast of Texas. So as you can see, it's more than just a bit west of the Mississippi, but we use that as as a general guide, since the bulk of the population does occur in the east. Here are the male and the female ruby-throated hummingbird. As with a great number of hummingbirds, the male exhibits the color or the beauty. In this case, the red throat, or what we call gorget. Females have that creamy white throat and chest. Females weigh an average of 3.25 grams. Males weigh an average of 2.8 grams or less. Each is approximately 3 inches from the tip of the bill to the end of the tail. And females range on bigger overall. Males live an average of 2 to 5 years. Females live an average of 4 to 7. But first, they must make it to their first birthday. The reality is that only 1 in 5 babies born this summer will live to see their first birthday. And that's not just hummingbirds, that's all baby birds. Because life as a baby bird is hard, and we keep making it harder. However, there are always exceptions to nature. I want you to meet Miss Bonnie Crutcher, 97 years young, host to the oldest known ruby-throated hummingbird, which happened to be a male. This happens to be one of our research stations. We routinely saw this bird through the years, and last summer we caught him again. He's in Dover, Tennessee. I had banded him as an adult bird in 2017. We captured, like I said, we captured him on and off through the years. And he now holds the longevity record for ruby-throated hummingbirds at 9 years and 4 months. He beat the longevity record, which was from Virginia, a bird banded by my mentor Bob Sargent, and that bird was 9 years and 3 months. So we've already returned to Miss Bonnie's twice this year. We've not caught the bird. That doesn't mean he's not there, because he usually shows up in August. So we'll be back there on August 14th to see if we have a 10-year-old ruby-throated hummingbird. So a hummingbird heart beats 250 times a minute at rest, up to 1,200 times a minute when hovering in front of a flower. They have the biggest brain in the avian world, ratio to size. It takes up approximately 4.2% of their whole body mass. So they are extremely smart birds. So here are the juvenile male and female ruby-throat. We begin seeing them usually in early July, and many times folks think they get all excited and they call me because they think they have a different species of hummingbirds going to their feeders, because they look different. But note the buffy edges on the body and feathers and perhaps a spot or two on the throat, and those are your juvenile birds. This time of year, the fact is that the majority of birds that are at your feeders are juveniles, ones that were hatched this summer. These young birds are preparing to make their first migratory journeys alone. They are not led, they are not taught, but the knowledge is inherited and innate from their parents. Ruby-throat hummingbirds, like all hummingbirds, are nectar specialists and amazing pollinators. 20 to 25% of their diet comes from flowers and our feeders. That's the carbohydrates that provide the energy. But 75 to 80% of their diet comes from insects. That's the protein. That supports breeding activity, feather growth, muscle development, and so on. It's soft-bodied insects, so no-see-ums, mosquitoes, small spiders, fruit flies. They don't eat ants, they don't eat beetles, they have an exoskeleton. They need both nectar and the insects to survive, and they need to eat about every 10 to 15 minutes, except when they're actively migrating. They're not static feeders, meaning they don't spend every minute of every day at your feeder or in your yard. Hummingbirds are what we call trapline feeders. And from our research, we know that these birds make a half-mile loop all day long, feeding on that loop. If they stop somewhere and there's no food in that yard or a spot, they move on, and they keep making those loops all day. In lean times, when flowers aren't blooming or there aren't any feeders hanging or they can't find any insects, they will travel even further to find food. They will not stick around and starve to death. So hummingbird tongues are incredibly highly specialized. This is a hummingbird tongue under extreme magnification. The tip of the tongue is split into two tubes that have tiny flaps that resemble tiny feathers. And it was once thought that hummingbirds sucked nectar up like we drink through a straw. But slow motion video out of the University of Connecticut in 2015 from a graduate student showed the tongue works more like a micro pump. So imagine as a hummer approaches a food source, the tongue is automatically squeezed flat, compressing it and building up potential energy. Once it makes contact with the nectar, the tip of the tongue splits like a snake's forked tongue. Then those hair-like fibers separate to increase surface area that comes in contact with the nectar. And as the hummingbird retracts its tongue, those little fibers on the side zip closed, trapping the nectar and drawing it upward into the grooves of the tongue, 15 to 20 times a second, hundreds of times a day. Additionally, their tongues are twice the length of their bill, so it won't fit inside the beak. So hummingbirds have yet another unique anatomical adaptation. Their tongue wraps around their skull when retracted, anchoring to a bone and cartilage which snakes behind the jaw over the top of the head and rests near the eye socket, as depicted in this picture here. So hummingbird flight has long fascinated anyone who watches them. This is a 3D image and an actual x-ray of a ruby-throated hummingbird. And it shows, I like to show it because it shows the large keel or breastbone where all the flight muscles are attached. And those flight muscles make up 25% of their total body mass. A hummingbird that cannot fly cannot feed effectively since they can't walk. Some species do hop, but we don't see that so much in ruby-throated hummingbirds. Their legs and feet are proportionately small and weak and positioned close to their body, adapted mainly for gripping on a branch. So a hummingbird that can't fly, or a ruby-throat that can't fly, is a dead bird. Unlike other birds, except swifts, which is a distant relative of a hummingbird, they do not fold their wings to gain power and lift. Rather, they keep their wings stiff and they rotate them at the shoulder, which gives the appearance of moving in a figure-8 type motion. And it's that motion that allows them to gain power and lift on both strokes at a rate of 60 to 80 times a second. So this specialized movement enables them to fly forward, backwards, hover in midair, and even fly upside down. And they can do it all at up to 40 miles an hour. The wing is also the most delicate part of the bird, and unfortunately, due to the size and nature of the bone structure, once broken, seldom can it be repaired. Which is why it is extremely important to keep feeders away from your windows. And if you have large picture windows, investigate how to prevent window strikes from happening. So ruby-throated hummingbirds have 950 feathers, which are systematically and symmetrically lost and replaced each year in a process known as molt, M-O-L-T. Every bird molts. Since once a feather is grown, it's essentially dead. And being dead, they wear out. So in order to fly efficiently, you need to replace your old feathers with new ones. For ruby throats, once breeding season is complete, which we are approaching, it's time to molt those body feathers. Because you can molt your body feathers while you migrate. And in most cases, finish molting before you make it to your winter grounds. Once they're on their winter grounds, they will molt those flight feathers one at a time. If you lose one on the right, you're going to lose the same one on the left and grow a new one, so that when they make that journey back next spring, it's on fresh feathers, and when they arrive at their breeding grounds, they are sporting their best breeding plumage to impress the ladies, and the ladies to impress the males. So these pictures are actively molting ruby-throated hummingbirds. Sometimes folks think they have bugs or mites. They think something's wrong with them. But the white that you see are actually what we call pin feathers. A pin feather is just a young feather. They are covered in a keratin sheath. That's how it pokes through the skin. Because a feather just can't poke through the skin unless it's something hard, and that's where the sheath comes in. So it pokes through the skin, and as it grows, it sheds that sheath, and I like to say then it blooms into a beautiful feather. So it's quite natural, and sometimes not quite an attractive process. So speaking of feathers, let's look at this male ruby-throated hummingbird. Yes, it is the same bird on the same feeder. The picture is just taken from a different angle. And like most aspects of hummingbirds, their feathers are also incredibly unique. The color does not come from pigment, but from the way microscopic structures in the feathers reflect and bend light. So each feather contains layers of pancake-shaped cells that contain many, many tiny air bubbles. The flattened shape and tiny air bubbles within each cell create a complex set of surfaces. So when light hits those many surfaces, it refracts, reflects, and recombines, producing the color we see. So literally, the toss of a head can turn that color on and off. Think of a prism. It's an easy way to think about it. When held at the right angle, you can turn something colorless into something astoundingly beautiful. And it's this special adaptation that the males use to attract the females and let the other males know, I'm bigger and better than you, so stay out of my territory. So as I said, they do use this iridescence to signal other hummingbirds for defense of territories and attracting a mate. And it is totally a unique adaptation restricted to hummingbirds. So migration is one of the greatest mysteries, yet for me, one of the most fascinating and astounding attributes of this tiny little 3-gram bird. It's largely an invisible phenomenon, mostly happening unseen and literally happening many times right before our eyes. It's generally triggered by the increase or decrease of daylight hours in the spring and fall respectively, which in turn triggers a hormone within the bird, within the hummingbird. So during the winter, the majority of the ruby throats are down here in the Yucatan Peninsula, down as far as northern Panama. They're feeding, they're surviving, and they're just waiting. They're also low man on the totem pole when they're down there, because there are many tropical hummingbirds that live there year-round that have territories. So they're interlopers. So they pretty much keep a low profile, just feeding and hanging out. Then they're waiting for spring. And then as the daylight hours increase, it stimulates that hormone, telling them it's time to prepare. It's time to get fat. Birds don't normally carry fat. It's just extra weight when you're flying around. But when you migrate, you need that fat, because it is that fat is the fuel that enables these birds to migrate. So, in the spring, all ruby-throat hummingbirds are in a big, fat hurry to get to within a half a mile of where you were born to reproduce. We know this from banding, that these birds are extremely faithful to their breeding and their feeding grounds. So, reproduction is essentially replacing yourself for the long-term survival of your species. That's really what reproduction is all about, and so they're in a big hurry to do it. And because they need to hurry, ruby-throat hummingbirds take the shortest route, which is over the Gulf of Mexico. They fly 650 miles non-stop. It takes them 20 to 26 hours, depending on wind and weather, and once they start, there's no stopping. There are many myths about ruby-throat hummingbird migrations, like they ride on the back of a goose, or they hitch a ride on an airplane wing or a boat. All are false. They do it solo, and they do it on their own wing power. Then as the summer wanes and fall is approaching and the daylight hours shorten, the process of migration starts all over again, and that is what we are beginning to see. It starts way up north as soon as early July, but the difference is in the fall, nobody is in a big hurry. You've done your job, you've reproduced, you replaced yourself. Now it's just time to make your way down into the Yucatan for the winter. So they meander. They fly 25, 50 miles down the road. They stop, they feed, then they repeat. So if you think of it like the flow of a river, birds in, birds out, that's pretty much what fall migration is like. This, if it works, is from Cornell Lab. It shows the abundance through a typical year, how they spread out, how they increase in population due to the young, and how then they make their way back down to the Yucatan Peninsula. So I'll let you watch it one more time, how they make their way up. And of course, it doesn't show it going over the Gulf, but you can see that they are going over the Gulf, and then they make their way back again. And it's just through the months.
So they fly all night long?
They usually leave about midday. We observe them, we can notice that they are feeding, like crazy. And then they launch off about midday and make that flight. Overnight, landing the next day. When they land, they're tired, they're hungry, and they usually are looking for food immediately. So, we've already discussed some of the myths, but there are a lot of them out there. But there's one that just happens to be my pet peeve, and I don't know why, but it is. And if I had a dime for every time I hear it every season, I would never have to do any fundraising for any of my research. And it is that many people refer to the first bird that shows up in the spring as a scout. There is no such thing as a scout in the world of hummingbirds. No. By definition, scout is someone who comes ahead, checks it out, and then goes back and tells everybody else. When? Have you ever known a ruby throat to share anything? They are not scouts. You can call them early arrivals, you can call them whatever you want. Please don't call them a scout. They're simply the first to arrive, and they are usually male. Not 100% of the time, but they are usually male. Some will stay in your yard, most will just be stopping and continuing on till they get to their breeding grounds. So, help spread the word. But in the world of hummingbirds, the female is indeed the workhorse of the species. She builds the nest, and nests are about the size of an English walnut. It takes her about a week to build that nest. She uses spider webbing and soft fibrous plant material to make the cup, and then she covers it in lichen to camouflage it. She'll then lay 2 eggs 2 days apart. So she'll lay one, and then 2 days later she'll lay another. But unlike songbirds, she begins to incubate that egg immediately. So babies will hatch 2 days apart, about 12 to 16 days after the first egg has been laid. She'll feed the young for approximately 3 weeks. That's a long time. She feeds them a slurry of insects and nectar that she creates in her crop and regurgitates down their throat. And depending on where she is in the east, from north to south, she can do it once, twice, and even 3 times in a season. Around here, it's about twice. The 3 is when you get down along the Gulf Coast, Mobile, down that way. So a 13-year study conducted by my good friend Dr. David Pitts, a retired professor of ornithology at UT Martin, discovered that it takes approximately 60 days from the time she chooses a branch to the time the young are fledged. Now, how would that be possible in such a short breeding season to do it multiple times? Put simply, the female ruby throat is an expert multitasker. So for 5 years, I joined David at his 50-acre study area, his farm, and so we could track individual female birds. So we caught birds like I caught them out here. The only difference was I marked them. So we marked them on their neck with an A or a B or a 1 or a 2, so that he could see that bird on that nest and put an individual on an individual nest and then study what was going on. To this date, he has found over 330 nests. That in and of itself is a feat, because unless you happen upon one, or a ruby throat puts one where you can see it, it'll take you an average of 60 hours to find one if you're looking for it. But what we found was that when nestlings are approximately 2 weeks old, the female ruby-throat is already building a nest over here in sight of this nest. So she's building a nest. She's feeding her babies every 10 to 15 minutes, also feeding herself. And then as soon as the original nestlings fledge, they fledge to what I call a natal tree or bush. They make their first short flight, and they hang out in that tree or bush, practicing flying for 3 to 5 days. So now she's building a nest, she's feeding one here, and she's also feeding one over there, and she's feeding herself. So she is indeed busy. And as soon as they leave that natal area, then she will go and lay eggs and start over again. If at any time a nest fails, we also found that she will immediately begin to build another one. And nests fail pretty often. But, and then she knows at some point that she's out of time. And so then she just gives up at that point. Do they reuse nests? It all depends. If she has successfully fledged 2 young from that nest, she may come back and try to use that nest, but because those nests are made of biodegradable material, so to speak, the rain and the winter usually has them disintegrating, but she will use that same spot. If that spot was not successful, she will not try there again. So, what are hummingbird predators? There are man-made predators and there are natural predators. By far, the biggest predator are outdoor and feral cats. Now you say, how can a cat catch a hummingbird? Cats are patient. They will lay there for hours. And if you are a hummingbird, especially a young hummingbird, you might be scared at first, but after time, it's all about the food, and you're not going to see that cat anymore, and that is the chance for that cat to get that bird. So be mindful where you hang your feeders if you have outdoor or feral cats. Hang them high so that the cat cannot jump to the gutter to get them. So other predators are snakes, praying mantis, blue jays, titmice, and occasionally a Mississippi kite who thinks that a hummingbird flying through the air is a dragonfly. So let's switch gears a bit and talk about man-made nectar and feeders. Because as an educator, for me, this is the most important information I can share with you. First, let's talk about a little history. So the first commercial available feeder was designed by a man named Lawrence J. Weber out of Boston for his wife. She had read a 1928 National Geographic story about feeding hummingbirds from these tiny glass bottles, and she wanted to do it. So he built her something that looked like this. He knew a glass blower, and he had this built for her. So she spent the next 10 years doing what she called taming her hummingbirds in her yard and entertaining her neighbors and her colleagues. And really all she was doing was feeding them. And then in 1947, National Geographic ran another article which included photos of the hummingbirds in the Webster's garden using the feeder. Interest was aroused, and in 1950, the Webster feeder was offered for sale by the Audubon Novelty Company in Medina, New York, and so it began. Since then, there have been many different types and designs, and of course, in turn, I have a lot of questions about what's the best feeder, what should I buy, and let me tell you, everybody has an opinion. So I'm asked that question all the time, and my answer will always be the same. It is the one that comes totally apart, has the fewest pieces, and is the easiest for you to keep clean. Why? Because keeping a feeder clean and nectar fresh and using the correct nectar are the most important aspects of feeding hummingbirds. Their lives literally depend on you doing it correctly. There is one caveat to this. I do caution people about metal base feeders. They're really pretty. They usually have some kind of decorative reservoir, but 99% of the time that metal base does not screw apart. Therefore, you cannot assure that it's mold-free inside, and you can't it will rust over time. And that rust will leach into the nectar, and this will cause hemochromatosis, which is a fatal condition where that iron from the rust builds up in a hummingbird liver and intestines and other organs and will kill hummingbirds. So, I have a metal base feeder. It's never had nectar in it. It sits on my desk in my office because it was a gift. So think about that. So now you've got this impeccably clean feeder. Now let's talk about nectar. So when we feed hummingbirds, it's imperative that we do it as close to natural as possible and strive to do no harm. So please, 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 no red dye. No additives, no preservatives, no artificial sweeteners, no honey, no raw sugar, and I don't know who came up with the idea that hummingbirds need electrolytes. You should never, ever either depend on any kind of additive to extend the life of nectar either. In my opinion, that's just laziness. Ask yourself this question: would you drink it? At any point, would you walk up to your hummingbird feeder and drink it? And if the answer is no, then don't give it to your birds. When in doubt, pour it out. That's right. When in doubt, pour it out. It's that simple. Sadly, many hummingbirds die each year due to spoiled nectar, the wrong nectar, and dirty feeders. And if you've ever seen a hummingbird struggle to breathe because it has mold coating its tongue and its throat, it's pitiful. It's horrible. And we can stop it. It's just keeping nectar and feeders clean. So, how often should you change your nectar? The number one rule here in the southeast is the higher the temperature and humidity, the more you clean it and the more you change it. So, you know that excessive heat? Every day you should be changing your nectar. Every day. Every other day, when it's like normal, July and August, but never more than, you never should leave it out any more than 3 days. So, how can you do that if you go on vacation? Bring your feeders in, unless you hire somebody to come over or have a neighbor or a grandchild or somebody who will change the nectar for you as you would do it yourself. Bring it in. I guarantee you, this time of year when you get back from vacation and you hang it back out again, they'll be back. And if it's not them, it'll be the other ones that are moving on through. Because these birds remember where every feeder, every patch of flowers, every nectar source is along their migratory route. So fill accordingly. If you only have a few hummers, fill it as much as they can consume, in 2 days, if you're worried about waste. It's said that a single hummingbird can consume about 2 tablespoons of nectar a day. So, there you go. So feeders are purely just part of feeding hummingbirds, as we talked about. If you want them to stick around in your yard, perhaps breed there, you need to find a well-rounded habitat. So the basic components of a well-rounded habitat are food, water, place to hide, and a place to raise young. That's basically it for all living creatures. But with hummingbirds, no pesticides or herbicides. Because remember, 80% of the diet are insects. If you use pesticides, you're killing their food source. So they may come into your feeder, but they're not going to stick around. So to create a good habitat, this goes into more detail. I like to think of when you're planting your gardens, think in terms of 3, something that's going to bloom in the spring, something that'll be blooming on and off through the heat of summer, and then something that'll stick around until first frost. That way there's always nectar in your yard. Provide a water source. Here in the east, ruby throats really get most of the liquid they need from nectar, but some will use misters or shallow fountains or shallow water features to bathe in to keep those feathers in good shape. Provide cover for them so they can get out of the weather. And of course, as I said, leave your spider webs on your porch in the spring. They use them to make their nests. You can sweep them off after that. And no pesticides. So, when should you take your feeder down? There's one simple answer to that: when you can no longer maintain it. So that goes with your vacation, that goes with if you're sick and tired of it. Just when you can't take care of it, it needs to come down. It doesn't matter if it's the height of summer or if you're on vacation, because remember, these guys are feeding on a loop and they'll stop by, and if it's not there, they'll just move on. So you won't be starving them if you take it in. But if it's well maintained, our general thought for ruby throats is 2 full weeks after you see your last bird. So if you see your last bird on October 15th, keep it up until Halloween. If you see a bird on the 29th of October, keep it up for 2 more weeks. Because your feeder just may provide food for a young bird who was a little slow in getting, hatched late, was slow in getting going. An adult bird who maybe got caught by a predator but luckily got away but lost some flight feathers and needed to grow them back before they continued their migration. So you could save a life if the feeder is out there. However, this is Nashville, this is 2023. This is a female rufous hummingbird. And this is what I do after ruby throat hummingbird season is over. So when a hummingbird is reported at a feeder after November 15th and before March 15th, in Tennessee, Kentucky, and Mississippi, I seek permission from the host to capture, ID, band, and document this winter visitor as part of a collaborative effort to try and understand what's truly going on with these western hummingbirds coming east, and in some cases spending the entire winter and returning year after year after year. This was her 3rd year back. This is a 4x4 patio in an apartment complex in Nashville, 1 block from the Nashville Zoo. And this bird in the snow. So, here she is, first confirmed, and you can tell, we knew it was her by the band on her leg. So the host, Bill, rigged up his iPhone and to his iWatch, had it on a little tripod, put it out there by the feeder on the fence, and when she came in to feed, he was inside, and he hit his little iWatch, which took a picture on his iPhone, so we could get, and he did it over and over till we could read all the band numbers, so we didn't have to capture her again in year 2 and 3. But we knew that she was there.
How do you capture them?
We'll get there. So the first confirmed species of western rufous hummingbird in the east was collected in 1904. And for decades, these birds were assumed to be lost or doomed by vagrants. But because we've literally banded thousands now of winter hummingbirds, just like this one, we've come to know that the vast majority of these winter hummingbirds, they are not lost, they are not sick. In fact, recent banding data by my colleagues along the Gulf Coast shows that the exact same individual hummingbirds are returning to the same southern backyards winter after winter. And this strong pattern of survival may in fact confirm that it is a successful, repeatable lifestyle dictated by internal programming rather than a one-time navigational error. Here is a map of winter hummingbirds banded in Kentucky, Tennessee, and Mississippi by yours truly. There you go. So they are everywhere. So how do you band a bird? So this is a series of pictures of the process of me banding for research. It's the same as I'm doing out there, so if you haven't seen it, come out and see it. You can see it as well. And so we have a trap, and we do it the same in the winter. We have a trap where we hang the feeder inside. It's all about the food, so they fly in freely. And then because I'm sneaky, I have a little remote control that drops the door. And then my volunteers go over and get them, put them in a cotton bag, and bring them over to the table. Then we put them in the toe of a pantyhose, because that's the only thing that pantyhose are good for. And then we will identify the species, and if it's this time of year, we know pretty much it's going to be a ruby throat. We will identify the sex. Because of the difference in size, they wear different size bands. And all hummingbirds wear a specific size band. So we have to know and put the right band on the leg. So then we put the band on. These are the bands. They're teeny tiny. You can put 5,500 of them in an envelope and mail them with a first-class stamp. That's how lightweight they are. I like to tell kids that. Then we put it on the leg of the bird, take a bunch of measurements, and then we let you release the bird. And so why do we do this? What's the purpose of this? It's an individual identification of a hummingbird, or any bird, and from them we can learn about dispersal and migration routes, behavior and social structure, lifespan and survival rates, reproductive success, population growth, health of the species overall. We can learn about molt patterns. That's how we learn that they molt their body feathers, after breeding season, and the differences in molt timing. Pretty much anything you can think of to design a research project about a question about a hummingbird, you can design a project once you have an individual, so you can study that one bird, or many one birds. So this is modern hummingbird banding. Has been around officially since the late 70s. Before that, they experimented with it some, but it became much more uniform and what I call modern in the 70s. Nowhere near as long as other species of birds we've studied. So this kind of banding is called point-to-point tracking, meaning you put a band on here and you hope that somebody over there catches your bird. That's how you learn. However, cutting-edge new technology has arrived. In 2023, Cellular Tracking Technologies out of Cape May, New Jersey, released a solar tag about the size of a tapestry needle and weighing 0.058 grams. These tiny solar Bluetooth tags were designed and deployed on monarch butterflies as a means to help locate additional places where they might be overwintering in Mexico, so that habitat could be protected as well, because they know where the big lot of them go, and that's protected, but they wanted to find other locations in case something ever happened to the main one. So hummingbird researchers, far smarter than I, soon realized that these tiny tags had the potential for real-time monitoring of hummingbirds and would reveal aspects of migration that we've long wondered about, guessed about in some cases, and change what we were thinking, and in many cases, maybe even proved us wrong. So in January of 2024, the first initial deployment of these cellular tags took place on hummingbirds in Jalisco, Mexico, on large tropical birds, weighing typically twice, sometimes 3 times what a ruby-throated hummingbird weighs. And then they used flight cages, because that was a good, controlled, and safe way to monitor and observe whether the tags would affect them, wouldn't affect them, how would they fly, what would happen. And once the team felt confident about the attachment style and that the larger hummingbirds were flying without impediment, they moved on to smaller ones like this white-eared hummingbird, and then to rufous hummingbirds, and then on to ruby-throated hummingbirds, all with the same great, amazing success. So with cellular tracking technologies and researchers in Mexico having laid this groundwork, Southeastern Avian Research and I jumped on board. So I wrote and submitted a proposal to the Bird Banding Lab, which is the entity that gives me my permit, and is part of the Department of the Interior USGS. Looking to look at breeding ground movement and foraging behavior of these three populations of ruby throats that had banding connectivity. Meaning if I banded one here, it showed up here. I banded with here, it showed up here. And so all three spots had connectivity, and they shouldn't have. Because one was 30 miles from the other was up and over a ridge, and usually these birds will use ridges as highways, but they never usually drop down on, they always pick a side. They never go back and forth over a ridge to feed. So it was interesting that we had connectivity through banding, so I wanted to see if it was deliberate or if it was happenstance. So I was trained to deploy tags by the team that went to, one of the guys that went to Mexico, and thanks to conservation and research grants from the National Zoo at Grassmere and the Tennessee Ornithological Society, the needed equipment and tags were purchased in February of 2025, and then we received the information that we could deploy 15 tags. So it is still very much deemed experimental, so we were required to submit a special report at the end and the conclusion of all our observations, which we did. And as you can see, one of the spots was here. And so these solar tags are glued on the back of hummers in the central mass using non-toxic super glue. We had tried eyelash glue, but super glue added negligible weight and was easier to apply and dried a whole lot faster than eyelash glue. So we decided this super glue gel actually was the way to go. So here we are putting them on. So on June 11th, 2025, 15 tags were attached to 7 males and 8 female ruby-throated hummingbirds at those 3 locations. Each bird had to meet health and weight requirements and the confidence that they were indeed on their breeding grounds. And they did, and so on the tags went. So these first generation solar tags were designed to pick up a signal, which was emitted at 1 second intervals. And you picked it up by using the CCT's handheld sidekick antenna, or an app on your phone that was developed by Project Monarch. The phone app picks up about 100 meters, a tad longer than a football field. The sidekick had a range of about 700 meters or about half a mile. We recruited volunteers at each of the 3 locations and asked them to download the app and listen twice a day during traditional heavy feeding times in the AM and the PM. Because if you know anything about hummingbirds, you know they feed early and they feed late. And then they were to record all their observations, sound, weather, visual sightings if they saw them at other times of the day. And then we asked them told them if they wanted to, they could wander and go try to listen to them. But this is basically what they saw when they got a ping. Here's one of our tagged birds on day 26 of wearing his tag. You can see he's beginning to molt it off, which is exactly what we expected. One of our tags lasted on one ruby throat for 62 days, which was a whole lot longer than we had anticipated. But we saw him and heard him on day 62, and then we assumed the tag fell off because we no longer heard him. Here's a picture of one of the hummingbirds caught during regular banding season who shed her radio tag, and the only reason how we knew she had a tag was by the band on her leg. So you can see it leaves no long-lasting anything because they molt those feathers back in again and everything's great. So what did we learn from this first deployment? Well, we noted that these tags didn't bother the birds. We observed them moving about with ease, competing for food sources. All the females had signs of nesting. And we learned that habitat has a huge influence on detection. Because these are solar tags with no battery, because it's the battery that creates the weight, Once they got up in the canopy, we lost them because these tags unfortunately lose power pretty quickly. Fortunately, they get it back pretty quick too. So we also learned that standardized listening times were not as effective or predictable as we might have thought, and that humans, even with the best intentions, put too much variable into our listening. So, as we plotted and planned for the summer of 2026, planning to add more nodes or listening devices to take the human aspect out of it, guess what? A new generation of tags was already being developed and tested. So these new tags, Blue Plus, are even better at sending out a signal that are picked up by any connected cellular device. So that meant we no longer needed the app. That meant we no longer needed the sidekick. So what it means is that in high-density locations like a neighborhood where hundreds of cell devices exist on a single block, I can literally tell you what street that Hummingbird is on. They don't have to be within range, of, like I said, of the sidekick or the app any longer. So this is an example of a ruby-throated hummingbird tagged in April by a member of Nancy Newfield's banding team in Louisiana. If you don't know who Nancy Newfield is, she was the one who put tags on birds first. She convinced the lab to let us do it 50-some plus years ago. So this female ruby-throat flew from the Shreveport area where it was captured to Terre Haute, Indiana, and is assumed to be on her breeding territory because she keeps going back to a central location. But this is how she forages all day long to get food. So all this is something that I thought I would never see in my lifetime. In fact, when I presented programs to STEM students, I was always saying, hey, quick, grow up and invent a tag I can put on a ruby throat. But here we are today. So what did we learn from all of this? Well, in a nutshell, we are beginning to have a better understanding of the entire life cycle of a ruby throat. From birth to death, from breeding to wintering grounds, to monitor population health, understand that critical role that they play as specialized pollinators, and to understand their response to climate change, to human-driven rapid habitat alterations. In other words, to learn about as much about them as we can so that we can protect them so that they're around for generations to come. So what's on the horizon for me and for my nonprofit? Well, we have 30 plus Blue Plus tags to deploy. We were hoping to deploy them this season. They got delayed, and they are coming Monday, according to FedEx. So because they're for breeding season, I'm going to hold them over until next year. Because they don't have a battery, I don't have to worry about the batteries going bad. They're just solar. So we're going to do that. We've also joined a collaborative group of like-minded researchers called HumTrack. It's actually an international collaborative working to study movement and migration using these Blue Plus tags. And then last Thursday, we found out we were granted permission from the bird banding lab to put tags not only on ruby throats, but on wintering rufous hummingbirds as well. So we will also continue our collaborative study with Rhodes University on blood parasites. Little is known about blood parasites in avian flu and ruby-throated hummingbirds, and we're out to set a baseline. So I'm collecting 500 blood samples from hummingbirds, and we'll send them to Rhodes University, where they will do their molecular magic and do what they do there. And then I have 12 years worth of recapture and longevity data from 13 different locations, and we are working on a manuscript now as well. So, and of course, none of this would be possible, and I'd be amiss if I didn't express my thanks to my SEER volunteers, to all my Hummer hosts who let me come to their place and hang out for hours at a time to band birds, to my research colleagues, and my financial and supporters. each one plays a vital role because this research couldn't take place without them. So I like to acknowledge them. So I'd like to end with this thought. Legend says that hummingbirds float free of time, carrying our hopes for love, joy, and celebration. The hummingbird's delicate grace reminds us that life is rich, beauty is everywhere, every personal connection has meaning, and that laughter is life's sweetest creation. So with that, I will take any questions that you might have.
Could you go back to those lines for code?
Sure.
I have a question. Is it true that if the hummingbird loses its tail feathers, it won't migrate until it grows it back?
No. It could migrate with short distances, probably not over the Gulf, but it could migrate short distances with no tail feathers at all. We catch every once in a while one that probably has escaped a predator and has no tail feathers. The tail acts more like a rudder than anything else. It's those flight feathers.
How small is the adolescent?
They're as big or sometimes bigger than their parents. So if you're seeing a teeny tiny bird moving around your garden, and you think it's a baby hummingbird, it's a hummingbird moth.
I know.
They move just like hummingbirds do, and they look just like them.
Can anyone download that app?
Project Monarch?
Yes.
Yep.
Because I live in Texas and I have hummingbirds coming to my feeder.
Yep.
And I would just be curious if any of them.
Yep, you can
yours.
download, anybody can download the,
And what's the name of the app?
Project Monarch. You might pick up Monarch, you know, and then if you do, there's instructions on the app who to contact and let them know.
When you were talking about the females, like, still raising their new hatchlings but already building another nest, are they mating with the same male,
No.
or it's a different male? Yeah, I just didn't know.
Yeah, that's another myth up there. There are no such thing as family groups in the world of hummingbirds.
Yeah.
The only job of the male is to mate with as many females as will have him. He must impress them. It's her choice. And that is because she wants the most virile, best-looking hummingbird to be the father of her young, because that gives her young the best chance of survival. Which then brings me to another thing. People are bothered that hummingbirds are always fighting, and are always asking, what can I do to make them stop fighting? Nothing. That is who they are. They are not ethereal angels. They are hateful, meanful creatures. But you want that, because it is those ones that fight the most, that are the strongest, that are going to survive. The meek ones are going to disappear. So if you have feisty birds, you have good, healthy birds. Don't try to change their behavior. Enjoy that behavior.
I just put up more feeders.
You can do that too, but that is a slippery slope.
It is.
Yeah.
Because you have to maintain them.
30 feeders.
Yep,
All
you
day
have to
long.
maintain them. That is correct. So, only put up, I've had some hosts, like Miss Bonnie with that, she only has 3 feeders on her front porch. But I can go there and catch 75 birds in a morning. But that's all she can handle. She's 97, So, and that's all she's ever had. So, you don't have to have 30 or 50 or as many as they have out here.
You're gonna get what you're gonna get.
Yeah. Now it builds upon itself, but it takes time. Any other questions?
So you captured a banded bird, I'm sure you're taking measurements and comparing notes.
Yeah.
So what do you see when you growth?
Well, overall, there is a paper that I just read, Anna's hummingbirds, which you find out in California and Arizona and out that way. They're one of North America's biggest hummingbirds, not the biggest, but they're up there. They're big and bulky. Their bills are growing longer and thinner because of our feeders. So they're evolving to be longer and thinner because of feeders. So by continuing to take all those measurements and then collectively looking at it over time, that's what we found out about animals.
Do the adolescent birds tend to come back to the same area? Like you said, they want family oriented, but to breed and.
Yeah, because they are extremely faithful to their breeding and feeding grounds. So you're gonna come back to where you were born, if you get there. Or within half a mile. It might not be your yard, it might be your neighbor's yard, but it's going to be in that vicinity.
So if you, places like Arizona that are warm year-round,
Uh-huh.
do they still migrate?
Yes. And I was just in Sedona last week giving a talk at the Sedona Hummingbird Festival. And right now, migrating through there are broad-tailed hummingbirds, they have some black chins migrating through, they had a costa, so the birds are migrating through. Annas are pretty much, and Annas hummingbirds, they're expanding their territory up into Alaska. Wow. And spending the winter in Alaska. So it's always changing, always evolving. Anything else? All right, I'm going back to Bandon.
Thank you.